to take into consideration the need of a society rather than the greedy overdevelopment that happens sadly too much in architecture nowadays. Elements of our engagement densify the built and the unbuilt, by which we mean try to have a denser city so as to avoid all the problematics that are linked to transportation and the pollution that it creates, but also the unbuilt as in public space, parks, gardens, squares, walkable areas. We think of ourselves as an office that emphasize a lot about the pedestrian point of view in a way. And I think this is pretty manifest in those projects which I'd like to open with. The Kalvebod this one here, and the Badehus of Islandsbrygge here, which for this project, the idea is to expand the public realm without touching the built realm. And the morphology of the project basically derives from the shadow study that we conducted beforehand. As you can see, these two pretty ugly buildings. It's an office building to the right, the squarish one, and a Marriott hotel on the left. They are pretty high rise, about 12 stories high maybe. And they cast a huge shadow on the pier, which is the reason why the piers up until this project happened were pretty much unused. They were just unused basically. And the idea is to deform the public realm so as to offer a place of leisure, a boardwalk, which invites the pedestrian again. And we try to activate this, it is essentially a landscape project, this one, but we try to activate this landscape project with a program, architectural program, which will plug onto the lower edges of this boardwalk in the form of containers which host various programs. So far, it is a kayak club, as you can see. And there is also a reference with this container architecture in the sense that historically this harbor is an industrial harbor. And this is the idea behind this, this proposal that we made. And it is actually working fine now after a few years after it's been built. As you can see, it is pretty occupied by pedestrians. And one thing that's very interesting about this project, I think, is that the waterfront in Copenhagen is not swimmable. It is not allowed to swim there. But sneaky as we are, we tried to create an architecture, or rather a landscape, I would say, that would invite the pedestrian to swim. That would assemble the conditions for them to think that it is okay to do it. And it actually worked because they broke the rules. And so much so that from this year, the municipalities just agreed that it was possible to swim there. So unfortunately, we don't have pictures of this, but you can see already that before it was allowed, people were breaking the rules. And this is kind of the ultimate kick as an architect, to be able to actually change the politics of a city. And here you have a few more visuals of the project with like I said, the water level slab, which hosts the various program that activates the landscape, as you can see in here. And yes, and that leads us to our next project, which is in Faaborg. So it's still in Denmark, but it is the island of Fyn. I don't know if you know a lot about Denmark, but there is Julien, which is attached to Germany. Then there's the island of Fyn, and then there's the island of Sjælland, which has Copenhagen. In Fyn lies Faaborg, on which we reused a lot of what we created for the Kalvebod project, because we thought that it was adequate in this sense. because this is already and has always been swimmable sea. And we have a kind of a finger plan, I would say, which allows for various bathing places, as you can see here. And the program of this project is again a kayak club actually, and also a sauna and a meeting point for boat enthusiasts and such. So this is another one. Yes, a few more visuals of the project. Yes, here you can see the finger plan and how it delimitates various bathing opportunities. So there is one for children, there is open sea and such, how do you call that? A place where you can jump into the sea from. Okay, back to the manifesto of the office. Don't build new, reuse. So this is another project that is in Brussels this time, along the canal. And this is an existing building, which is the Citroën garage, which was built in the 30s, if I'm not mistaken. And we thought it had such architectural beauty that we've had a very touch-by-touch approach. We didn't want to change that. We just wanted to lay a new program, which was the brief we had on top of the existing building. So this is a project we've done with Didos Cofido and Renfro, local offices. And it's called Canal Centre Pompidou in Brussels. So the idea is that this garage would be rehabilitated into an art/architectural museum center, a place of knowledge, basically, where you have education, you have a museum, you have library, and also food and such to try to activate the program. So in orange, you can see what we added to the existing black and white represented in here, existing project. So a crane to be able to lift stuff on the top of the building, because on the top of the building we have some kind of, it's pretty similar to the Serpentine Pavilion in London. It's art meet architecture program where we have ephemeral artist installation. And yes, as you can see in the first ground or second ground slab, we've done some holes to allow for double heights and various programs that you could find inside a museum. So on the left part is the art museum, on the right part is the architecture museum, and then you have the library on the very end. Yes, this is, again in orange, we represent what we added to the building. So you have a public space which links the garden throughout the building. So you will access through the garden here, then inside the building, and upwards to where the crane is located, and we have this garden there, and across the building onto this belvedere here, and then down again to connect to the pier, the existing pier. Here it is in plan. Another model view. We work a lot with models at JDSA. We believe that's the best unbiased way of actually testing out architecture, and we have a very exhaustive approach towards this too. So this is the ephemeral artistic program that was to take place on the top of the roof. In here you can see the pedestrian walkway that goes through the building and then upwards and across. Another view here with the belvedere that gives onto the pier. And this is an aerial view to give a better understanding of the program here. This leads us to our next project. The idea is to combine architecture with infrastructure, which is something that we often do actually. It's also, I don't know if you know about the office, but we have a project in Copenhagen called The Mountain, where the idea, the base concept I would say is the same. But in here, we talk about the Rimini project. It's in Italy. And basically, this beachfront that you can see used to be very, very popular. Was a very popular destination all throughout Europe. And the brief from the client, the municipality, was to make it appealing again, which it lost a lot of its appeal in the latest years. So in here you see the different programs and the existing. So we have the historic center there, the new touristic port, and the beach here with the buildings that you see, small buildings, but big enough that they would act as a screen from the beach to the city behind. Is something that we tried to overcome. We thought that it was a bit of a shame to lose that connection between the beach and the city. And we tried to integrate this into our design. So there is basically two directions. There is going along the beach, and there is crossing from the beach to the city. And from this starting point, I would say, we tried different approaches in volume to see which would fit best in that case, which again would be like emphasize those two directions, not cut the views from the city to the beach, and at the same time keep it as a nice promenade along the beach. So you can see various model tests that we've done. As I said earlier, we have a very exhaustive approach towards that. We will not design one project and think this is the one. We have to test out various schemes to figure out which fits best in the context that we work in. So in the end, we decided to use this as a reference, which is the famous ball marks pavement pattern from Copacabana in Rio. We thought it was relevant because it is actually kind of a contraction between these two directions which we try to emphasize. So the one that follows the beach and the one that goes across the beach. And this pattern translated into three-dimensional volume gives us this, which, as we try to illustrate it, emphasize on both the transversal connections and the longitudinal connection along the beach. So there's a few visuals that explain also the program. I don't think it is extremely relevant right now, but there is it's mainly sports and residential. I don't think this is working anymore. Yeah. Hotel and a few offices also. And the idea about this is, as you will find, is kind of a leitmotif in our office, is to merge, in a way, architecture and landscape, which means that all the roofs are walkable. They act as parks and gardens for the citizens, not only for the dwellers. And this gives us this in model again. So this is the hotel part. As you can see in plan. A few more visuals here. That's a lot of visuals. And here we go. Now our next project is the Holmenkollen ski jump in Oslo, which is maybe the one that JDSA is most famous for, at least in Scandinavia. It is a very, very iconic building, and the idea is if you have to build new, minimize energy resources for construction. And the idea of this project is to reduce the amount of steel we need to actually construct it by having this cantilever that you can see here. And you might think at first that it's not very relevant for this conference, but the fact is that it has been thought out also to offer from the top of it, which is also public and open to everyone free of charge. It is an absolutely amazing point of view on Oslo Fjord, and it gives you a very good understanding of the Fjord of Oslo. From there, you can really see the topography and the relation between the sea and the land. And I think if just for that, it is a pretty interesting project. In here, you can see it's when it was first opened in 2011, I think, and it hosts 70,000 people. And yes, it has been described as the Eiffel Tower of Norway, or of Oslo at the very least. But at the same time, Julien kind of wanted to break that iconic vision of it. And as soon as he won the competition, he faced a lot of, I would say, xenophobic critics about the fact that he, as a Danish, Belgian, French architect, could not capture the essence of Norway, which is where the ski jump has been invented about 100 years ago. And he answered back that Zaha Hadid did the Innsbruck ski jump in Austria, which is a very famous building, a very accomplished building. And so why would it be otherwise? It's a critic that we face a lot of time as architects, because it's like, if you're not from a country, you cannot design in a country. It is absolutely ridiculous, if you ask me. Again, our approach is to have different nationalities and to work across the whole world. And every project, every new project is you need to basically learn a whole new set of skills, and you cannot really sorry about that. And so I'll just carry on. And so that's what he basically answered to those very appalling critics. That was his answer. And yes, just to say a bit more about the fact that every new project, you need to acquire a new set of skills, and it's very stimulating in this sense. Thank you. And so, yes, you have a lot of constraints about the slope, about the wind protection, about the structure, obviously, because the structure of this building is evidently very, very complex. And this is where we thought of using the cantilever as a way to reduce the amount of energy and the amount of matter that we would need to use for this building, and also to reduce the impact of the building on the landscape. As you can see, there is only 2 anchor points in here and there, and everything else, I mean, basically half of the superstructure is cantilevered, and that was our answer to the brief. So this is a few pictures of the projects inside the context. It's been critically acclaimed as a successful building and a very iconic building in Oslo. And for having lived there for 3 years, I have to say this is, you can see it from everywhere in Oslo. And it is very iconic. And a friend of Julien compared it to, said he looked like a lounge chair for God, which inspired him. He's this photomontage here. I have to say, Adam looks pretty relaxed on this lounge chair. And but he sees it more as a Chinese spoon in the idea that most of the building, if half of it at least, if not 2/3, are actually under the ground level, and it just peeks its head like a Loch Ness monster, he describes. So you can see from the inland with the typical Oslo wooden house and all, you can just see it peek its head. So it is very present in the landscape, but in a kind of a discreet way, if you will. A few more visuals, and I would like to go to this one, which shows the rooftop of the building, which is again public access and free of charge, and an amazing viewpoint onto the region of Oslo, which, for having been there, it is really, really amazing. You can just imagine the view onto the fjord from the building. It is definitely, I think, it definitely has a place in this conference as a water-related project in that sense, if any. Which is also our next project, Control the Void, Inverted Urbanism. This is a project we use for this project. It's in Caen, in France. The name of the project is Manhattan. We use as an architectural reference the Opera House in Oslo, also by Smedt, which we think is very interesting in the sense that it also, like most of our projects at JDSA, blurs the frontier between landscape and architecture. It's like a building on which you can walk atop of, and it generates amazing views. And so basically we use that as a reference, an architectural reference, I would say. And we use the typical landscape of bocage, it's called in French, that is proper to, that is typical of Normandy, which is basically a rolling downhill agricultural fields. And we try to superimpose that for this master plan. So the idea is that as a coordinating architect, the master plan we do is propose a suspending garden, if you will, on top of which the buildings, which will be done by various architects, have to plug onto from below, from down below. And yes, there's a few visuals of it. Unfortunately, we didn't win this one, so it just stayed at the competition stage. But you can see how it works. It was mostly, I would say, cultural, university, office dwelling. It's mixed program again, and but yeah, unfortunately, we didn't. This one we didn't win. A few visuals from the neighboring hill showing how this landscape / architecture would look like from afar. Few more visuals, aerial view also to show the global project. And then the next project, that is to dare urban generosity, which again is kind of a leitmotif in the office. And this is the iceberg project. This is also very emblematic of our work at JDSA. It's one of our most famous projects, I would say. The initial brief, not brief, but 3D shape of the building from the urbanists was a pretty boring courtyard typology, which we thought didn't make much sense in the sense that only 1/4 of the building would actually be facing the waterfront, and it would also deprive its neighboring buildings from this relation to the water. So what we proposed instead was to break free from the height limit, but not in a greedy way, again, more in a sensical way. So all the bits that you see in orange there are the ones that we take out of the initial volume, and we then superimpose them on the top of the limit, the height limit, to give us this volume of this architectural language of peaks and valleys, which then allows everyone to have a view onto the waterfront. So from the street, from the public realm, I would say, you have transversal views to the seafront. And from each of the 200 flats of the development, you also have more diagonal views onto the waterfront, but you always have a view on the waterfront. And this is what it translated into in terms of 3D volume in the model we won the competition with. And this is then the build project. So as you can see, there is not much difference between the two. We actually managed to stay firm on our position from the start, which is very seldom the case in architecture, but in this sense, this project was an achievement. Then you have a few visuals from the competition stage and from the build stage. Same, to show that we held firm on our intentions, and then the balconies to emphasize on the views that you can get from the flats. So this is in Aarhus, I forgot to say. So this is in the northern part of Denmark, second biggest city in Denmark. A few more visuals to show the relationship between the building and the waterfront. Yes, And our next project, again, this is one of our main concerns. We have a lot of environmental concerns in the office, and to maintain biodiversity is definitely one of them. And this project here is in Brussels again, along the canal, like the one I introduced before. We've done an urban study, and again, you can see what I meant earlier with the fact that we have a very exhaustive process in design. So we have made, what is that, about a dozen proposals for this project, which is basically, as I said, located along the canal. It's a pretty big scheme. And in this project also they had a very boring global massing, which we decided to ignore once again. And the idea was to round off the corner so as to manage to have public spaces around the building, and then break free again from the height rule, saying that it makes sense to have a higher peak there because it will not block the views, and opposite, it would be nice to be lower so as to conserve, to maintain the views to the waterfront, as we try to show with these diagrams. And then on the top of the roof, again, this reflection about the fact that it should be public space, it should be a place for pedestrians, it should be linked to the city. It cannot just be architecture dropped into the city and ignoring the landscape around. It has to be in symbiosis with the landscape, which we try to describe in those following diagrams. Basically, the existing green space around the building are indicated in green here, and we decide to connect them. So in order to do so, we have to deform the volumetry of the building to go underneath the building and connect to the existing park there. And we do the same with the other end of the building, so as to create some kind of a loop, like a pretzel-shaped building, if you will, which you can access from this garden, go atop the building, enjoy the view there, and then go down again inside the courtyard of the building to then join again the other park on the right side here, and maintain the existing pedestrian walkway along the canal, which we thought was very interesting. So you have a few more visuals of the project. This was actually commissioned by the city of Brussels, but in the meantime, they changed mayors, and the following mayor was not so fond of the project, so it actually never happened, which I think is a real shame because it was one of my favorites in the office. Which leads us to the final part of the conference. Can architecture be landscape? And we have two projects to talk about this subject here. One is in Turkey, in Adana, and not unlike the Rimini project in Italy, it is about the relationship between the beach and the city. Although this one is more remote. In Rimini it was very close to the city center. In here it's very remote, but the problematics are the same in a way. And our proposal is also in the same essence, I would say, of how would I put it, integrating landscape and architecture, blending landscape and architecture in the same project, and have all the program that is asked for the project inside this form that we propose here. So it's again a hilly, up and down kind of architecture that connects to the ground level, connects to the pedestrian public realm, and propose that kind of split between public and private in that sense. So as you can see, just a word about the program, sorry. It's mostly a sports program, but there is also dwellings and hotels and such, and a marina, and everything is walkable still, and yes, and then you have the park on the top of the buildings, then you have private gardens for the dwellings, and then you have the public garden for the public realm. A word about the program. It's this part here is residential. It's not fascinating, really, but yeah, a few more visuals of the project to explain how we make it work. Few more visuals. And then our second to last project is in Rio, Marina da Gloria. So for this, the brief was to have a. So it's a pretty interesting site. There's some. It's got a lot of potential. It's very close to the airport. There's the Museum of Modern Art, Architecture. Sorry, World War II monument. Marina da Gloria is the existing one here, and it was again about how to link those at least visually and how to make it work in terms of a marina. So yes, the situation of it is just at the end of the beach walkway of Copenhagen also, by Bill Marx, and our proposal was to define this point here as the focal point, I would say, and increase the boat activity of the marina, and to extend the pier so as to protect the inside of the marina from the waves and currents that you will be subjected to inside. And then from this shape, we fit the program. So this is a diagram of the program, shopping, restaurants, convention center, and exposition center. Then we just make it fit on the design land, as you can see here. And then again, sloping down to connect to the public realm and to the neighboring gardens, and going up where we think that the view would be interesting, as you can see on the diagrams here. And so that would be the final stages of the competition with the model. That was just before the Olympics of Rio, and we didn't win this one either, unfortunately. But we thought it was relevant for this presentation. Few more visuals, and now for the final project, we reverse the question and ask whether landscape can be architecture, or rather can create or inspire architecture. So this project here is almost literally a transcription of the meandering of a river as architecture. So this house, as I said earlier, we work on various scale in projects, whether it be master planning, urban work, or architecture, and down to furniture design. We have we work on a lot of different scale and with the same level of implication for each. But we believe they're all part of one big thing. And so you can see how the house acts like a river inside the topography, and basically the river becomes a house. And you have a few plans extract to show how it works. There's also a reflection on how the architecture kind of mimics nature, creates canyons. We used also this, how do you call that? Wooden plank cast concrete for the sustaining walls. So on the other side is ground, and we leave the landscape untouched. And then this inside the house is reflected for the interiors with actual wood, and we have a very playful game between the outside sustaining wall and the inside board plank wooden wall. And yeah, there's a few visuals of the project. The idea, again, is to kind of almost conceal the architecture behind the landscape, that the house is tucked into the landscape, so that from the northern part, on the other side of this wall here, it is almost at the same level of the landscape, so it kind of disappears into the landscape, where it really opens up onto the south. Hope we got some visuals. Opens up onto the south for the residents to enjoy the best sunlight exposure you can have. Again, the involvement about the interior architecture also for this project. Obviously, it's a very small scale project. It's a house, so we have more we have more resources to put inside interior design and furniture design and such. And then the relationship between the landscape and the house, again, with almost a continuous landscape on top of the building, which is blending into the landscape. And that would be it. Yes. So if you find it interesting, you can find many more information about those projects and more in our latest publication, Built and Builds, or directly onto the website jdsi.eu, which you are very welcome to. Thank you.